Om asato ma sadgamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityormamritam gamaya aviravirmayedi rudrayate dakshinang mukham te namam pahi nityam. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet compassionate face. My subject this morning is God helps them that do not help themselves. And of course, it is against the current saying, which is, God helps them that help themselves. I think this saying is ascribed to Benjamin Franklin. Whether he himself originated it or quoted from some obscure source, I do not know. As regards this negative version of Benjamin Franklin's saying, that is to be ascribed to Swami Vivekananda. Only once, I think, he pronounced it, as far as we know from records, and that was in course of conversations at the Thousand Island Park. It is not just merely playing upon words that the Swami did. And in this he is not original in saying this, because we have exactly a similar statement in the Bhagavad Gita. The 18th chapter of the Gita, which no doubt many of you have read, contains, as it were, the gist of his teachings in the previous discourses. And he has brought in many subjects which otherwise also have not been dealt in the previous discourses. And he says there, speaking about non-attachment and the idea that the self is not an agent. First of all, he says that in Sankhya Kritante Proktani, O mighty armed, listen to me. I am telling you what has been spoken of in the Vedanta. The commentators have translated the word Sankhya there as Vedanta. All the commentators. And then he said that there are 5, what word shall I use? 5 causes of action. The word cause to be taken in a rather loose sense. And I shall enumerate these 5 things to you. And he said this in the following verse, Adhishtanam tatha karta karanam cha prithak vidham vividascha prithak chesta daivam evatra panchamam. These are the 5 things he enumerated. He says, Adhishtanam, which is the body. Tatha karta, that is to say the doer, this ego, which says and thinks that it is doing things, or it will do things. Karanam cha prithak vidam, various kinds of karanam or sense organs. Sense organs, senses of perception and senses of action, as well as, of course, antakaranam, that is to say the inner organs, the mind, intelligence, and so on and so forth. They are of course various, and rightly has been said, the various organs of action. Vividascha prithak chesta, and various kinds of efforts. Now these efforts have been explained by our commentators as various functions of the vital forces which are inherent in our physical and mental system. When you start to do something, of course it is a play of energy. Without energy, no action can be initiated and no action can be processed and done. But this energy has been considered to be a category in itself by the Indian philosophers, and they have called it prana, or vital energy, which pervades the physical body as well as the mind. And sometimes it has been even identified with the self or Brahman, God or the spirit. But here it is the vital energy that is in the mind and the body, and they are various. Vividascha prithak chesta daivam evatra panchamam. And the fifth cause, the fifth factor is daivam. Now that has been again translated or commented upon variously by various commentators. Shankara, for example, says this daivam means those divinities which preside over the different parts of body and mind, and particularly here different parts, different senses, physical and mental, the senses of perception, senses of action, mind, intelligence, and so on and so forth. There is a quaint idea, and it is quaint in first knowing, and afterwards it begins to get hold of you, and you begin to wonder if there is not a profound mystery and truth in it. It is that everything has got a presiding deity. It is, in its crude understanding, like animism. Just as you found in Greek mythology that a spring has a goddess there, a river has a goddess there, they are always associated with beautiful natural phenomena, some deities, some gods or goddesses. And from the very ancient times in India, from the days of the Vedas, they have conceived these. For example, there is a presiding deity of the eye, and there is also a presiding deity, the same deity of the sun, and so on, so that you could think of this universe in various ways. You could think of it objectively and then call it, just as we call it, objective material phenomena and so on. Or you could think of everything as an embodiment or the outer form of a spiritual principle, of a celestial principle, living superior to ourselves, endowed with more or less perfection, and therefore its function is unalterable and in any sense and unmistakable. Well, these ideas have persisted from very ancient times, and even today people believe in this. Every action of the body and the mind, every action in the outside of the cosmos, every phenomenon, every natural sources or category, everything has got a presiding deity. If you, for example, want to benefit regarding your vision or benefit from the sun, and if you worship the presiding deity of the eye and the sun, you will derive that benefit. That is the understanding. So the commentators have said that here, Daivam means those deities which preside over the senses of action, senses of perception, and various aspects of the mind. Others have said, no, that has nothing to do with it. It is the karmas, the past karmas, the good deeds and the bad deeds which you have done. The past. And of course there are then two kinds of forces. Wrong things are evil forces and right things are good forces. And they have as it were an independent entity, and who can deny this fact? If I indulge in something bad for some time, it compels me. Then I of course then call it, well, it has become my habit. Or by whatever name you call it, you cannot deny that it has a compulsive force upon it. Now if you try to understand it in a little finer way, then you come the doctrine of karma of the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Jains, and you find it to be a mysterious force. Just consider how many of those things we have done in the past, these karmas. And if you agree with the Hindus that there must have been a past of the soul, in other words, if you believe in previous births, then just imagine there is endless of births, or I should say beginningless births. So that when you look backward, you see life after life after life, extending backward into the invisible. And of course, in each birth then you have the innumerable good and bad deeds, and all of those things are there. Some of them may have been a little counteracted, but just imagine what an accumulation of forces there are there, and therefore what compulsion they have. And so these have been called Daivam. Well, Daivam, the literally word means pertaining to Deva, the shining one, God, providence, or anything that is subtle. And here they have called it Daivam, sometimes therefore it is technically translated as predestination or fate. In other words, it is a force over which we have not any control, and it is so mysterious and complex that we cannot always account for its action. Well, however horrible it sounds, it is no more horrible than the natural phenomena with which we are encountered nowadays. Is not the atomic force a horrible thing? Why? All nature's phenomena is horrible. San Franciscans know about the earthquake. Nobody would say that is a very pleasant, charming phenomenon. There is not much charm about it. I once saw an earthquake taking place before my eyes of a large proportion, which you would call probably number 8, 9 or something. And I saw the earth going like this. I happened to stand on a street. I could keep my position. And I may say that for the time being it looked charming. I mean, it was not so frightening until I saw before my a huge brick building, just dancing this way, that way, suddenly fell down in one side, and afterwards I noticed big steel girders are twisted like anything. Such was the force. But afterwards I got a little frightened. See? Well, anyhow, there are not the nature's forces are not always charming. And why should we be frightened about those psychic forces and psychological forces? And why should we think that as regards those we should always expect charm? It should be always pleasant to us. And we therefore think this Daivam, this incalculable force which we have accumulated, it is unpredictable from ordinary human understanding, and that compels us now. Whichever way you explain this, the gods are not under your control. You might please them, if you like, by worshipping another way. But if you take the other interpretation, which I myself favor, accumulation of our past experiences and actions, I mean the effects of such, and therefore a force compelling us every moment, then you must admit that this is beyond our control. The other four things we have a control over, but of the fifth we do not have any control. Well, to go ahead with what the Gita says on the subject of our discourse this morning, then the Gita says, now look, under such circumstances, only a fool would think that he alone is the doer. He is the doer. And then it goes on further that the self is not the doer at all. Here a distinction is being made between the real self, which is beyond the body and the mind, and the ahankara, you see, which I translated as the doer, karta, which is the ahankara, the ego. The ego may think it is doing, and it feels that it is doing things. When it reasons, it finds he is not doing anything. And then when he reasons further and knows himself truly, he discovers that he doesn't do anything at all, not because, or not only because, that there are other factors involved in every action over which he hasn't much control, but also because he discovers that he is not this pretentious doer, the ego, but something different from and beyond this ego, the true self, the spirit, the Atman, which is exactly the same thing as Brahman or divinity absolute, according to this Vedanta philosophy. Here you see, both these ideas are included. God helps them that help themselves, and God helps them who do not help themselves. If you start, for example, with the idea that you are the doer, you want to do, you should be able to do, and you do not feel that you can act up to the other idea that you are the non-doer, akarta, non-agent, you are the pure spirit. And so far as then actions and other things are concerned, at most that can be said is that you are the spectator of everything, the witness, sakshi of everything, but not involved in any of those things. You could take that view. See, at most you could take that view. But you do not feel that you like this view. You cannot just be a spectator, you just jump into everything. Anything arises, you are ready for a fight. That is what we do, you know. We react to everything. This I which says, I enjoy, I like this, I do not like this, I see, I hear. It just merely doesn't say that, it always reacts to everything. Now, suppose you are in that condition, then this maxim would be very good for you. God help them that help themselves, except some of you might retort by saying that what's the necessity of God there? If we help ourselves, then we don't need God's help. You would say that, wouldn't you? But I think Benjamin Franklin was right, because as you remember, Sri Krishna speaking of the 5 factors that are involved in any kind of action or successful action, he mentioned Daivam evatra panchamam. The 5th is Daivam, which is beyond ordinary control. I can keep my body strong, adhishthana, while observing the laws of health, eating properly, sleeping properly, having taken exercise. I have built up a body. We all think that if we take a little care, we can have a good enough body. That seems to be under our control. As regards the karta or the doer, that is always present there, except when it is asleep. Even then sometimes he becomes overactive and then he begins to dream dreams. But then we are thinking of action mostly in our waking state. And therefore this action and the doer of action, this ahankara, this ego, is always awake there. I admit that this ego does not always behave rightly. I have to admit that, because nobody is satisfied with what he is doing. He says, oh, I ought not to have said that. Oh, I ought not to have done it. I could have said that. You know, always remember that you could make a better retort after the time passes. Opportunity goes. But then ego is there. And the understanding is this ego should be properly trained. And if I may say so here, the ego is trained in relation to what is called dharma and adharma, that is to say what is our duty and what is against our duty, what is proper and what is improper, and to give a direct translation of these terms, dharma and adharma, what is meritorious and what is the opposite. Meritorious not merely in this world, but also in the other world. I mean, we should also think of what might happen after we die. Actions have to be judged, motives have to be judged, not merely in reference to this existence, but also existences to come. And if we then give ourselves the right motives, right feelings, right attitudes, then our ego is right. Ego is not in itself bad. Of course, we always condemn the ego. We say, don't be egotistical. And ego is this and ego is that. But why should it be always condemned? I say this, if ego is trained rightly and if it is purified, it is not such a bad thing. So that has to be done. Karanancha prithak vidam. You know, we train even our children how to see rightly, hear rightly. Senses have to be trained. Physical parts of the senses have to be kept in good order. Take vitamins, for example, if your eyesight is not right, and so on and so forth. Everything physical part. And as regards the psychological part, you teach children to observe rightly, hear rightly, see rightly, touch rightly, react rightly. Particularly in the West, you give a very good training in this regards. And in the East, we are, of course, we are feeble people, have been so long. We cannot make too much effort. But I think a time will come when we shall also be as expert in the training of the senses as you in the West are. Do not for a moment think that we are careless about outside objects. We are not. We have a keen interest and curiosity about the objective world too. But we train these things well, and similarly we train thinking rightly, reasoning rightly. This is of course the good training for the senses, internal senses, that is to say mind and intelligence. And also we train the senses of action, walk rightly, hold rightly. You see all these physical activities that we do. This is what we have to do. And of course there are these other things, pritok chesta. That is a little subtler thing. And you tell a person, now when you do things, do it with a will. Don't be half-hearted. Do it with full attention, and so on and so forth. This is called chesta. That is to say, calling forth and directing of the necessary energy, vital energy. And those things have to be done. That requires, I have found, that requires the best training, and many people do not want to pay much attention to these things. They will take an action. They do not know what amount of vital effort is required by that action. A man wants to be spiritual. Now, spiritual achievement requires a certain amount of action, vital action. Channeling of vital energy, restraining of vital energy in certain directions, redirection of the same energies in other directions, all these things are called, but they won't do that. They want to be spiritual, but they would not direct the vital energies rightly. And as a result of it, of course, all kinds of confusions arise. So these have to be trained. These are all under our control. But this fifth one seems to interject itself even into these four, and on that we do not have any control. This daivam, some you might call it fate, others you might call my past karma. That is the way we would say that in India. This word karma seems to have lots of connotations about it, and anyone would do for our purpose. And whatever you say, divine will, everything in God's hands, God did not let it happen to me, what can I do? And so on and so forth. You could express it very, but that is the mysterious element. And that is where this saying, God helps that help themselves, become meaningful. Because if we take the right attitudes regarding the four elements, first four elements of action, successful action, then it is said that the gods who preside over the objective and the subjective aspect of things, or the merits that we have accumulated, they all stand friendly towards us and help us. That is the assumption. That is to say, good forces are always range themselves against good intent, not against, by the side of good intentions, good people, good motives. And when a person wants to do bad things, all the bad forces come and range themselves by him. That's the understanding. And therefore, if we try to do good things, then this daivam, this strange power, celestial power, over which we generally haven't any control, we are nevertheless benefited by it, because the good part of it then comes to our help. God helps them that help themselves. But you can well understand from what I am saying that I am here speaking of a life which is not essentially spiritual life. I would not say it is not altogether spiritual. In spiritual life, for a long, long time, we have to observe these rules. No use saying, oh, the Lord will do it for me. Isn't he all grace? Then why should he not do it for me? I don't know. If God is all grace, then why is it you find there is so much misery in this world? Then you have to say that God is all grace, but He is not all powerful. Which is, of course, would be a manifestly wrong thing to say about God. He is omnipotent. Then is it that He does not know that there are so many sufferings everywhere? Then that would mean that God is not omniscient, which is also would be wrong. God is omniscient. They have said that nobody should reason about God, and I think that's right. You use certain ways of knowing regarding the things which you want to know. And it is the character of the object of knowledge determines the character of the process and method of knowledge. If you want to know what is in the heart of a person, you cannot know it by mechanical means. You will have to guess it, or you have to have the tremendous power of sympathy by which you can make yourself at one with the heart of another person. That is to be the method of knowing it. Mechanical things you know through mechanical methods, and so on. So they say that about God you should not apply reason, because reason is the wrong method and process of knowing, being that God is of a very different character than discursive reasoning. They have said that, but of course our heart does not want to accept this kind of arguments, because reason is the only thing we have, we feel, with which we can arrive at sure knowledge. However, these are facts. Even if you reason, you land in mutual contradictions. On one side you find that God evidently is careless about our suffering, having knowledge and having power, and having the power to redress all these things. Or you are otherwise, you say that God doesn't have power or doesn't know, and so on and so forth. It would not do for me to say God is all grace and then sit in a place and I don't have to do anything, God will do everything for me. Nor would it do for me to do all the wrong things I can and expect that God will do all the right things for me. It just doesn't happen. I am speaking of this stage. Well, the great sages have said, have given a reason for those things. They say that as long as you occupy the seat of the doer, of the karta, God cannot occupy the same seat of the doer, karta. Either you are the doer, you are the agent, or God is the agent. There is only one seat, and if you occupy the seat, then God cannot occupy that seat. Does it sound like a very reasonable reason? Some of you will say, well, if God wishes, He can push me out of that seat. He could. Why does He not do it? They say that God is awfully sensitive. God does not want to impose upon anybody. Don't you see how He has completely obliterated Himself? This is His own creation, and we happen to be here, and He has completely obliterated. All right, my children, have your fun here. I'm going. I won't stand in your way. And He has moved out of this universe. We cannot find Him out. We search for Him here and there. We don't see any trace of Him. Yes, it is a fact that as long as, it has been corroborated by experience of spiritual aspirants, those who have followed the path to God, they have found that when their I is completely obliterated, well, of course it does not happen at once, but momentarily it happens. You just put it away. No opinion, no will of your own, thrusting out, no, I want this, it should happen like this. When you do not have, and you have infinite patience, cheerful patience, you do not have even that much think that certain things must happen according to your will. You are not that important. You have become so non-egoistic, then you find flood of light, divine light, comes into your soul. You find sweetness, peace, strength, wisdom come into you. But when this ego raises his head again, it is like a small cloud which suddenly appears in the sky and hides the face of the sun. It has been experienced by people, and at that time they discover that ego is really obstructive. But until then, until you have reached that condition where you could obliterate your ego, what do? You change the ego. I say it in ordinary effort. We try to train the ego in relation to the sense of dharma and adharma. That which one should do and that which one should not do. See? Right and wrong, in other words. And then that kind of ego becomes proper for successful action, for progress here. But you go further in spiritual life, and we are, of course, concerned with more or less the spiritual aspect of the problem. We don't have to discuss the other sides of it. For a long time you have to make your own effort from the standpoint of your own eye. But that eye has to be purified a great deal. How do you do it? It seems like almost an impossible proposition. If the ego obstructs the view of God, how can it be put in line with God? It can be done. We could have these windows made of solid wood, then the light would not have come into this hall. But having used glass, of course, we allow the light to come in. The ego is there, an obstruction is there, the window is there. But the ego could be purified and made more and more transparent. It is still the ego, but it has become the pure ego, the transparent ego. And this we have to do ourselves at first. The purification afterwards we find that God himself also helps us to purify this ego. And how do we do it? By saying, I don't crave anything, I don't want anything my way. Well, it is a very hard thing for people to do. They want everything their way. They want also God to toe the line. They haven't got that, their ego does not stop anywhere. Of course, that's bad. That clouds the ego, darkens the ego, makes the ego gross. Haven't you seen in spiritual life, they always ask you to cultivate the passive virtues, what you probably would call the feminine virtues. They are not feminine necessarily. If by feminine you mean stronger virtues, then these are the stronger virtues. Only the strong man can cultivate those things. Patience, for example, is not for a weak person. You probably say aggressiveness, resistance is a manly virtue. No. That is neither manly nor womanly. That is no virtue at all. Of course, from the standpoint of the common man, resistance is good sometimes. Fight is good. But we are not talking about the common man now, we are talking about the spiritually minded people, higher people, greater men, and then so-called passive virtues become the real virtues. They are found to be the source of strength. Great men are patient men. You have to have tremendous patience and perseverance. Conditions are against you. What do? If you fight against them aggressively, you would get defeated. If there is a wall in front of you and you want to go that way, and you knock your head against this wall, you will knock your head. You will injure your head, but you will do nothing to the wall. Patiently, you might be able to remove one stone after another, and eventually you would be able to get through it, keeping your head intact. Because you know you have to use your head afterwards too. But some people think that knocking one's head out is a just wonderful, brilliant show of strength. Nothing of the kind, it is a show of stupidity. And in spiritual life, these things just don't count at all. Not I, but thou. That's the attitude in spiritual life. I have not seen a single person making one step ahead. by saying I, because that's the very negation of what you are trying to attain, your spiritual selfhood. If you say, well, if we don't do this, we shall become weak. No, you won't become weak as long as your motive and your goal is right. As your goal is attainment of that calmness and that serenity in which God becomes revealed to you, you may not allow the turbidity of egoism, cloud your own consciousness. You cannot allow to do that. And so here comes a twilight period of the soul, morning twilight. Because afterwards will come the blazing sunlight. In that we gradually try through patience, through endurance. Patience and endurance doesn't come naturally, it has to be cultivated. Perseverance, we fail many times, we rise up many times. We may fall down 1,000 times. Don't be frightened by it. Swami Vivekananda often used to say these encouraging words, there is no harm in falling down as long as you rise up at once that you fall down. Don't remain fallen down. That's where the trouble comes. You probably say, just since I've fallen, I might as well rest on the ground. No, that's where the mischief comes. At the moment you have fallen down, you just spring up, shake the dust and go ahead. Out of that strength comes. You hear of all wonderful lives, pure and unresisting and going ahead smoothly. You hear of those things. You hear only one chapter of this story. You do not hear of the other chapters, whether those things are written in this life or in previous lives. In those lives there are many falls and many rises, many struggles, many defeats, many victories. Out of all those things come that serenity of victory, of permanent victory. And then you look at this and marvel at them. But then everyone has to pass through this stage. If you have to do it in this life, there is nothing to be ashamed of it. The shame is not undertaking this struggle. And so you do undertake this struggle. You get up as soon as you've fallen down and try on. But always say, not my will, but thy will, O Lord. If you say, how do I know his will? You guess his will. One thing is quite sure about divine will, that he wants us to live according to his will. That he wants us to come closer and closer to him. They say that a devotee's heart does not yearn for God as much as God's heart yearns for man's soul. In the Rig Veda there is a description of God, and it is said, just as a cow cries for his calf, even so, Lord, you are crying for us. And if you have not heard a cow crying for his lost calf, you have not heard this heart-rending cry that rises from the mother's heart. A human mother's grief for a child does not express that grief as this calf grief expresses when it, for several days, day and night, it just lows and lows for the lost calf. It is the most heart-rending thing you could think of. And they say that God actually yearns for us in the same way. And so this is true, that he wants us to come closer to him. And that much is true, so you know that will. And anything that prevents your going closer to him is against his will. Well, if you are still doubtful, I would remind you that about God, the best thing is to know these things from a knower of God. There have been many sages and saints and prophets. They have said what God is, what God wants of us, and I think that's a very practical way. Find out what they have said about God's nature and God's will regarding men and work towards it. Bend your will to the will of God. Transform your consciousness in the likeness of divine consciousness. And as you do it, there is ego involved, but that ego is not that small ego, which pertains to the body and the mind and to our own small personality. When our ego becomes associated with this mean person, which is made up of the so-called body and the mind, then this ego becomes impure and becomes obstructive spiritually. But when this ego relates itself to God, to the Spirit, and tries to live up to it, then this ego begins to become purer and purer, more and more transparent, and gradually this ego is found to be in tune with God. That is how this ego in this period is to be cultivated. What shall I do? Should I do this or should I not do this? Alternatives rise. We judge and we find one thing is in favor of spirituality, another is against it. We do what favors spirituality. That is the way this ego works at that time. Here also you might say that God helps them who help themselves. It is an astonishing thing. Many people seek the proof of God. But I tell you, when you start seriously living for God, serving Him, you find that many miraculous things happen in your life. These things you could not have of your own accord. You meet people, opportunities come, changes take place in your mind which you could not bring about. And these things appear as miraculous to you. You might call it Daivam, and you might call it God or Providence. You might, if you want to be very rationalistic, you might call your good karmas, whatever that might be. These are certainly unthinkable, unpredictable things happen. And I say this, I repeat this, you would feel as if all the forces of the world are favoring you. All the forces, that is to say good forces, are favoring you there. And these, over this you did not have any control, you did not even expect these things. A great soul you come across, do you think that it could just happen? It could not just happen. And that soul helps you. And you could not make it happen. There is the gift of God, graciousness of God. You have some idea, suddenly that idea leaves you. Another idea takes its place and it brings about a profound change in your life. You have to call it as a divine grace. God helps them that help themselves. Yes, this is one side of this period of the function of the ego. But there is another side in this period too. While you are making effort, you are also making effort to be passive to God, to be the instrument in the hands of God. So there, you try not to become over-active on your own part. You find that in this effort to be at one with the will of God and to live up to Him, you find the most important thing that you have to do is to just dwell on God without any kind of agitation in your mind. You find that if you could just think about Him, if you let your heart rest upon Him, then you find wisdom comes, direction comes, your will becomes changed, all these things happen. But just this passivity, if I may say so, because it is not so much an effort as the obstruction of effort. And if you call the obstruction itself is quite a good-sized effort, and then that is also an effortless effort. It is as it were, you are trying to tell someone without making any sound. You whisper also, whispering. It is so low a voice that you do not want it to make an audible sound at all. It is just lying, quietly watching something so that the least movement of yours might not startle what you are trying to observe. It is that kind of effortless effort. If you say, how do you do it, how can it happen? If I were to tell you, this is how you can do it, of course you must know that that is a wrong prescription. Because you see, it is not a process. A process would be, of course, an effort. And it has to be an effortless effort. if you say, well, then this seems to be an impossibility. No, it is not an impossibility. It is like a man who has got good musical talents and is trying to sing a note correctly. He makes all kinds of dissonant sounds. Suddenly the right sound comes. Suddenly you will find that passive effort has come to you. Because that is basic to your deeper nature. I told you there is the self, our true self, which is the spectator, the sakshin, which does not become involved in the activities of the mind and the body or in the outside things. Our true nature just merely watches separated from these things. I should not even call watch in the sense of an intent observation. Sakshi is the right thing. As the things are passing, he is not interested in them. Passing before him, he is not interested in them. That is the true nature. In that, when the self attains to that condition, it becomes omniscient. One glance and he can see through things. Further, and that is more important, he sees through all these outside appearances into that which is the permanent and the real essence of everything. That is called spiritual vision. And in this attitude of the self, you see, a person realizes himself. He says, now I am truly myself. I am not just being pulled this way by this sense, that way by the other sense, this way by the body, that way by the mind. Little things don't bother you anymore because you recognize they have nothing to do with you. And you try to attain to that state, and when you attain to that state, you have immediately a consciousness that you have become truly yourself. You know, there is a strong inclination in every one of us to be truly ourselves. Sometimes we are made to live and act in a way against our own nature, we say. Here, truly you become yourself. And when you become yourself, you have attained to that passivity of which I was speaking. You have become the sakshin, and you have become almost at one with God. Of course, it does not happen at once, this at one-ment with God. It comes slowly and slowly develops. And one day you might achieve the real thing. And when you do that, of course, where is your ego? Your ego is gone. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that at first, we try to go towards God. God becomes, as it were, the magnet. And we are pulled towards him. He was speaking of that high state, when the soul has come close enough to God. And then he feels the pull, the attraction of God. And he feels drawn towards God more and more, more and more. Where is his ego then? His ego is laid aside. He said afterwards, after one has realized God, there comes another condition where the soul can attract God. He has power over God. But of course we are not concerned with that state now. We are concerned with the previous state in which we feel the attraction of God. And what do we do then? Our every effort, that passive effort, lies in not creating any kind of obstruction to this attraction of God. My friends, these attractions come often in the life even of the beginners. It has been my experience, and not merely in one case, in many cases I have seen, when people sincerely come into spiritual life, the Lord makes their life easier and uncomplicated. Things smooth for themselves. Of themselves they become smoothed out. They have opportunities. They know what to do. But, you see, many of them are not contented with that. They create obstruction of themselves. They do not like the serenity and the simplicity which has come to them. I am amazed seeing those things. You might think that I am a superstitious and a credulous person, but I would rather be that. And I think I have also had my share of wisdom, which all of you have. And I do not think that I am so credulous as you might think. I really believe that God is gracious to them and makes things easy for them. But I also have seen many of them, they do not appreciate this and they are not contented with that. They want to raise their own personal stones. They would not say to themselves, oh, how wonderful. Now I can give my heart and soul to God. My life is easy. I have to do just simple things. And after I have done that, I have no other response, no other trouble. I would just calmly and quietly, I shall try to go closer and closer to God. No, they won't do it. They will do all kinds of troubles for themselves until even the patience of God, I think, is tried out. If you say that God cannot become impatient, He can become everything. He can be patient and He can be also impatient. You cannot say anything of God. Sri Ramakrishna says that God's nature is that of the child. And certainly He knew God. You cannot predict anything of the nature of a child. The child is playing very happy with us, suddenly child set up a howl. What's the matter? Nothing is the matter, a howl. The child is playing with toy, he is pushing one in your hand, take it. Another person asks, no, I won't give that to you. My mommy gave that to me. Very precious. Next moment the same toy the child will put in the third person's hand. That's God's nature. But I have seen things happening again and again like this. That is to say, wonderful opportunities have come to people. That is attraction of God. And we should make the best of it. We should try to be passive in His hands at that time. We should not struggle. And so you see, if you learn your lessons, as you will always learn, we always learn our lessons. When God wants to teach us, He never leaves us until He has taught us the lesson. As Sri Ramakrishna said, if you are admitted into the hospital, until you are fully cured, you are not allowed to go out. You have to be fully cured. That is a hospital, God's hospital, nobody dies there. You see. Eventually all become cured. But if you say, well, I don't think I care for this, I would rather go home now. Well, you are not cured. Well, I shall just go out, half cured. Lord would say, no, not from my hospital. Now here, open, take this castor oil. Your mouth, and He'll give a big dose. You think you have got an easy job there. You become dance your own dance and nullify everything. No, you may not. You are not such a big shot as you think. If you say, why? I have freedom, go in freedom. You will still be in God's work. You think you are doing according to your will. Very soon you will find that you have fallen from frying pan to fire. You think it is a joke. So you learn your lesson. Yes, eventually we learn our lesson. You know, we should not fight God. The thing is to say, not I, but thou, O Lord. The Lord hasn't got any specific will. The Lord is not saying, do this, do that. Hate this one, love that one, and go on. No, you hear sometimes people say that. But don't you believe these things. Until the person has attained complete at-one-man with God. That is our understanding in India. A soul in search of God goes ahead and ahead and becomes completely identified with God. Then he returns to the world, and then God's will is communicated to them, and then if they say, God wants me to do this, you can believe it. But when the person is still going towards God, but has not attained to this at one man, did he say, this is God's will that I should do it, you put a big pinch of salt before you swallow it. Don't you trust it? desires rise. Mind will raise all these desires. The greater you are, the more pious is the desire that will rise. And this pious form of desire will deceive you. And the mind has dragged you away from your search for God, and afterwards it reveals its own true nature, which we find is nothing but an offshoot of some worldly instinct. So one has to be very careful. You just say, I want him, I do not want anything. But I admit this, we have still energies left, desires left. You cannot just by saying no, make them disappear. So you, for your own benefit, not because God willed this, you transform them into service of God. If you are a very active person by nature, you convert your activity to service of God, or to service of men, in which there is no selfish motive there. Both are equally good, equally effective. It depends on one's temperament. If a devotional temperament, he wants to do everything in the name of God. A person is not devotional in temperament, but he has got a desire to work, well, he can see this, I shall serve men. Equally good, if you do not expect anything in return. Equally beneficial, it will have equal spiritual effect upon you. Well, so this is what you do. You want to do a little, you want to do worship a little, you want to meditate a little or study a little, all right, convert everything into a spiritual thing. Give it a spiritual motive. In this way, you will find this basic nature of yours, at the present basic nature, which compels you to think, compels you to work, compels you to worship, and gradually become spiritualized. So a time comes when you become meditative. At that time, I repeat, this becomes right. God helps them that do not help themselves. They are at that time to conceive any will of your own seems like a sin to God. You do not want to have a will of your own. Thy will, not my will. You do not even say thy will there. We in India, we do not emphasize it so much, because that also implies action on our part. We say, thou, not I, my Lord. And we want to become one with him, absorbed in him. We do not want to have anything else. We do not want to see the world. We do not want to be conscious of anything else. So we cultivate it. So I say that in this state, this middle state in which almost all of us are, we have to cultivate both. We have to make our own effort in relation to our goal. And afterwards, when we have attained to a certain serenity of mind, we shall have to make our effort in such a way that we do not create any obstruction, an effortless effort. Only thing is very slowly and calmly, without disturbing anything, we reach towards God. And I say this too, though I am repeating myself, that God at that time takes things into his own hands. Some people say, why did not God prevent me from doing this? Yes, why? You say, in such and such a case he interfered. Such and such a man, we read in the story of the life of that saint, wanted to do something wrong, God came and prevented him. Why did he not do in my case? Yes, that's right. One answer is, if you want a rational answer, is that you are still in the driver's seat. And he would not push you yet. Sri Ramakrishna said that if a little child cries, a man would come and take him into his arms and try to console him. But if there is a big husky man cries, who would come and take him into his arms? We are too worldly wise. And therefore God does not come and take us as if we are helpless children. But if we lose this sense of ego and self-importance, then he comes. He takes the seat, driver's seat. And even if we are to do wrong things, he will come and prevent us from doing these wrong things. This is what it does. And so, you see, we have to just carry on in this middle state by these two attitudes until we reach that higher state. And then should completely surrender ourselves to God and say, Thou, not I, my Lord. Thou alone, nothing else. Om Yo Shanti Antariksham Shanti Prithivi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadhaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishve Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Sami Shanti Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in heaven, peace is in the sky, on the earth and in the waters. The herbs, the plants and the trees are all full of peace. The gods are peaceful. Everything in the universe is pervaded by peace. May this eternal, universal peace enter our soul and being. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.